Assault rifles are the most popular weapons in Warzone 2, and you want to know which ones are the best. But after looking into and testing out all the long-range assault rifles, it's clear that it comes down to the ISO Hemlock versus Cronen Squall. Yep, the Cronen is a battle rifle, but it performs just like an AR because it's fully automatic and moves like one. To help you decide which weapon is the best for you, I'm going to be comparing their stats and giving you my opinion on which one's the best after my extensive gameplay with each weapon. Next, I'll give you the best class setups for both of them, and make sure to watch through all the stats because you never know which one might be the deciding factor for you. I'm going to start off with the stats that you think about first: fire rate, time to kill, and recoil. And for fire rate, we have 674 rounds per minute for the Cronen and 600 for the ISO. This is a nice little advantage for the Cronen because it does make the weapon more forgiving if you miss a shot here and there, because the time to kill is affected less when you miss. The Cronen only adds 89 milliseconds to its time to kill per missed shot, whereas the ISO will be adding 100 milliseconds. That means the Cronen is 11 milliseconds more forgiving, which will play a big factor in long-range fights if you're missing a few shots. And if we move over to time to kill against full health players at 250 health, the Cronen will be better at every range with 534 milliseconds at close range compared to 600 for the ISO. The Cronen has an elite time to kill up close that is better than every SMG and AR outside of the Lockman sub and Chimera. But the ISO is still no slouch, and you can definitely compete with SMGs, but you'll need to play your situations a bit smarter to win with it. And then the Cronen only has 3 ranges for its time to kill while the ISO has 4. And the Cronen will always be about 180 milliseconds faster with its time to kill after the ISO's first damage range fall off. The TTKs are going to be 623 and 712 milliseconds for the Cronen, and then the ISOs are going to be 700, then 800, and finally 900 milliseconds. And you'll notice that the gap gets 11 milliseconds bigger at each time to kill range because each range adds 1 bullet to kill on each weapon, and the Cronen shoots slightly faster, as you probably remember, meaning that its time to kill goes up by 11 milliseconds less at each range. And quickly jumping into these ranges before we get to the recoil, we are going to have a better range across the board with the Cronen with an impressive 33 meters to 23, and then 48 to 32, and then we also have a 49 meter range for the ISO, while the Cronen doesn't drop off again. This will be very noticeable for these weapons as the ranges are very similar at the end, but the ISO has more damage drop-offs, making the time to kill nearly 200 milliseconds slower by that point. So the Cronen has the better time to kills, but this is going to do us no good if the recoil is terrible or way worse than the ISO. So let's head over to the firing range to compare their recoil patterns. And as you can see right off the bat, both of them have some vertical and horizontal recoil, but the magnitude and direction of the recoil is very different. The ISO has a pretty harsh bend to the right until it evens out right at the end, but the Cronen is going to have a much bigger magnitude of recoil that goes more vertically than horizontally, but it clearly bends to the left instead of the right. With these patterns, the ISO is going to be way easier to control, but the Cronen is very manageable after you get used to it, because most recoil patterns actually will go to the right instead of the left, which is why it's kind of weird to shoot with, but once you get used to that, no problem. Either way, this is still a clear advantage for the ISO Hemlock. Now, I'm going to transition into the stats that you may not find to be as sexy, but truly impact how the weapons perform and could make all the difference in which weapon you prefer to use. I'm going to start off with the average damage at close and long range, where the Cronen will be better at 40.8 to 38.2, and then 32 to 26.2. The damages are very close at close range, which leads to them taking the same amount of shots to kill in their first damage range. It's 7, but once we get to long range, since the ISO has that extra damage fall off, it's going to take 1 extra bullet to knock it 10 to 9 bullets. And while the ISO is the more accurate weapon, you technically don't have to control the recoil as long on the Cronen, making that difference a little bit less substantial. And another category that plays a big part on weapons is damage per mag, where the Cronen will be substantially better at long range, with 1550 to 1170 damage per mag. This is because the Cronen has a 50 round magazine compared to the ISO only having a 45 round one. And the Cronen does have far superior damage per shot at range, and this makes a big difference in trios and quads, but even the Cronen could struggle a little bit in quads where a full team has 1,000 health, and if you want to add capping them, it's going to go all the way up to 1,400, which is actually a big factor because of how common self-revives are in this game and being able to store them in your backpack. This is one area that they really tried to change from Warzone 1 to make the light machine guns have more of a place inside the game. Pretty much every AR-esque weapon won't have fantastic damage per mag. And let's go take a look at their long-range damage per second, where the Cronen will be far better because it just outputs damage at a far better rate, with it being at 348 to 260. The DPS pretty much just equates to the time to kill. Whichever weapon has the faster DPS is going to have the faster time to kill. And with that being said, long-range fights also come down to accuracy, where the ISO is clearly better, but it would require the Cronen player to miss 2 more shots than someone using the ISO for them to win the fight, which is very up in the air if that would happen. But what about the mobility that still is going to play a big factor in your mid to long range engagements, with these stats being somewhat similar, where the ISO will have the advantage here with the better aim down sight speed as well as the better movement speed. But then the Cronen will actually have a better reload time and sprint to fire surprisingly, and then they're going to be tied in ADS movement. And I want to focus on the Cronen having an insanely fast sprint to fire that puts it nearly on par with some machine guns. Make it make sense to me. There is no reason for that to be the case. You're definitely going to notice the movement speed feeling nicer with the ISO, but I don't see a glaring advantage for either weapon here. And the very last stat I'd like to go over quickly is going to be bullet velocity, where the Cronen is going to be better at 660 meters per second compared to 590 on the base weapons. This definitely helps the Cronen at long range a bit because it makes the bullet drop off less. If someone is running sideways at 75 meters, you won't have to lead your shots in front of them as much as you would with the ISO, making it easier to hit your bullets. But this isn't a huge difference and only a minor help. I put a lot of effort into making these videos, so please make sure to like the video if it's been helpful and subscribe for more helpful and entertaining Warzone 2 content to help ascend your gameplay. Now for my verdict on which weapon is better. The Cronen. I think you guys could probably tell from seeing the stats that I was going to say this was better, and it's actually also really great as a sniper sport or as a long-range assault rifle. It works in both roles amazingly, and its time to kill is killer across the board. You have a lead sprint to fire, helping it out up close, and pretty good bullet velocity to help it out at range. The recoil definitely bounces, but it isn't challenging to control after using it for a little bit inside the game. It will win you fights solely from its time to kill being far superior to every weapon other than the raw MG. But I don't want you guys sleeping on the ISO either. That is still an amazing and incredibly easy to use weapon. You can't go wrong with either one, but I'd use the Cronen before it gets nerfed in the mid-season update if I was guessing. I suggest you give both my class setups a try and see which one works out better for you. And we're going to start with the ISO Hemlock's class setup, and for this one, we're really just going to be trying to make that recoil as nice as possible while increasing the damage per mag and bullet velocity a little bit. So we're going to start off with this sack and tread 40 muzzle because it gives us vertical and horizontal recoil, and this is just going to help make the weapon an absolute beam. So for the tuning, we're going to go towards recoil stabilization at plus 0.31 and gun kick control at plus 0.28. Then we're going to use this F-Tac Ripper underbarrel because of that aiming idle stability. That is going to be such a huge help because it makes it 40% better. And so for the tuning, we're going to go towards recoil stabilization at plus 0.36 and towards aiming idle stability at plus 0.25. Next up, this is going to be to help out our bullet velocity. High velocity is the most important attachment here, and it's the only thing we're actually using to increase our bullet velocity, and it's going to get it to almost 900 meters per second. And the reason we don't make that higher is because in Warzone 2, if you're using a long-range weapon, you shouldn't really be trying to use it past about 80 meters. Because there's more visual recoil in this game, and past 80 meters, a lot of the average player base won't really be able to hit their shots with their ARs or LMGs, so there's no reason to try and make the bullet velocity over 1,000 meters per second if we're really just trying to use it in the sweet spot of 20 to 80 meters. And then I'm going to use the 45 round mag because this is just going to give us the best damage per mag possible on it, and it's still pretty low, so we got to use the 45 round mag even if it hurts our mobility a little bit. Then we'll go with the aim op optic because this is kind of the best zoom you can get without having crazy visual recoil. But if you do want to load up on the ISO Hemlock's bullet velocity, you could switch off the muzzle to a silencer, but you're going to be losing some recoil help, and I just don't think it's worth the trade-off. So give this one a try and let me know how you like it. Now let's look at the Cronen Squall best class setup for long range, and you're going to notice I do not use high velocity ammunition on this weapon, and I just use this HR 6.8 barrel instead that helps out with our bullet velocity. Not as much, but it's going to put us at 852 meters per second, which matches the ISO Hemlock we just had at 850. So it's going to perform just the same in the bullet velocity category, while also being able to help out this thing's recoil because it does kick a little bit more, and this is going to give us about 8-9% extra recoil control, which I find to be very useful. And for the tuning on the barrel, we're going to go towards recoil steadiness at plus 0.34, and then I go all the way to ADS speed because the damage range is already really good on this. The time to kill is going to crap on everything else regardless of if you lose a meter on it, but we need to help out the ADS speed because all the attachments are basically going towards recoil or aiming stability here. Then we go with the sack and tread. This is some vertical and horizontal recoil control. And then for the tuning, I'm going to go towards recoil stabilization at plus 0.36 and towards gun kick control at plus 0.28. And next up, I'm going to go with the demo firm grip instead of the F-Tac Ripper. If you go between them, you're going to notice they do the same exact thing, but they have a little bit different penalties and pros. So what happens here, the F-Tac Ripper gives you 13 extra % aiming idle stability at 40.5%, and this one gives you 27.5%. But I used the demo firm grip here instead because it only gives us half the movement penalties, and because this thing moves a little bit slower than the ISO Hemlock, I'm trying to not hurt it quite as much, and the demo grip still does a great job at giving you some good aiming idle stability. So for the tuning, I'm going to go towards ADS speed again at -0.49 because we're trying to make that a little bit faster, and then we go towards aiming idle stability at +0.22. And then of course you go with the 50 round mag because, as I said, any AR type-ish weapon isn't going to have that good of damage for mag, and this 50 round mag makes it one of the better AR-ish weapons in that category. Then I go with the Cronen Mini Pro over the aim op here. I don't know why, I just find myself aiming better using this optic, but you could switch to whichever one you find to be the best. But then if you guys want a little bit of a bonus class setup of just the sniper support Cronen Squall, I just removed the barrel and I switched it over to this stock, the FJX Z-Pad 9. And that's going to be because it gives us sprint speed, crouch movement, ADS, and aiming walking speed. This is actually going to be about 100 milliseconds faster on its ADS speed than the long range build. And there's going to be slightly more recoil, but you're not trying to use it out to 80 meters. You're trying to kind of limit the range to about 40, 45 before you want to use your sniper most of the time. And this thing just has an absolutely crazy TT camp close. And then you can actually use the sprint to fire speed advantage that you have on the Cronen Squall. And I hope you use these two weapons. They're both amazing. The Cronen's just a bit better right now until they nerf it. And if you want to see the best sniper in Warzone 2 right now, make sure to click on this video right here. I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.